German engineers have given the world some truly unforgettable machines. Think of the giants, the Dornier DOX and the Junkers G38. Heavy transports so massive they looked more like floating cathedrals than airplanes. Think of the fighters, the FW-190, all muscle and menace. And of course the jets, sleek, sharp, and in more than a few cases, downright beautiful. But not every German design was blessed with good looks. Some were awkward, some were bizarre, and a few were, there's no polite way to put this, positively vulgar. So here's the deal tonight. We're not judging success, failure, innovation, or combat record. None of that matters. We're looking at one thing and one thing only: how ugly these airplanes were, pure and simple. In other words, this is functionality over form at its finest. So settle in. Tonight we're counting down the 10 ugliest German aircraft ever built. Focke-Wulf A16. Stepping further back in time, we run into the Focke-Wulf A16, a relic from the early 1920s when the company was just finding its footing. It was their first airplane, built long before Focke-Wulf became known for sleek, hard-hitting fighters. And you can tell it was an early effort. As the original narrator joked, it reminds me of a fat pigeon that's been smushed. On paper, it was a modest, high-wing cantilever monoplane meant to carry 3 or 4 passengers as one of the world's earliest air taxis. The passengers sat in an enclosed cabin on wooden seats, sometimes even cushioned, quite a luxury for the era. The pilot, though, had no such comfort. He sat outside in an open cockpit perched on top of the wing, exposed to every gust of wind, rain shower, and bug in the atmosphere. Its biggest flaw was proportion. The fuselage was deep and thick in relation to the wings, and those wings weren't exactly slender. The entire aircraft looked chunky, heavy-set, and awkwardly unbalanced. Powered by a 75-horsepower radial engine, it could barely reach 85 miles per hour, usually cruising closer to 60. Only about 20 were built, serving quietly through the 1920s. Today, the A16 lives on mostly as a curiosity, a non-flying replica built by Airbus in 1988, now displayed at the Berlin Technology Museum, ready to startle unsuspecting visitors. Blohm Voss BV-141. Next on our list is the airplane that makes even veteran aviation fans tilt their heads, the Blohm Voss BV-141. Designed in the late 1930s as a reconnaissance aircraft for the Luftwaffe, it quickly became one of the machines that cemented Blohm Voss's reputation for building some of the strangest airplanes ever to take the sky. This aircraft was asymmetrical by design. The crew sat in a fully glazed gondola off to one side, while the engine and main fuselage were placed on the opposite side. From behind, it looked as if half the horizontal stabilizer was missing. The wings themselves had a shape that felt like the work of an intoxicated draftsman, sketched after midnight. Viewed head-on, it's the kind of layout that can trigger your OCD instantly. Nothing balances the way you expect it to. But beneath that off-kilter appearance was real engineering intent. The unusual layout was meant to solve long-standing problems with piston-powered reconnaissance aircraft. And by most accounts, the BV-141 flew well, with handling far better than its looks suggested. It was not a death trap. Still, it never got past prototype and pre-production status. The Luftwaffe ultimately opted for the more conventional Focke-Wulf 189. Cool? Yes. Innovative? Absolutely. But based on looks alone, it remains lopsided, unsettling, and undeniably ugly. Messerschmitt Me 323 Gigant. If the BV-141 made you tilt your head, the Messerschmitt Me 323 Gigant makes you wonder how it ever managed to fly at all. It began as the Me 321, a massive transport glider built to carry 200 troops or about 20 tons of cargo. The trouble was its weight, so great that you sometimes needed 3 Bf-110s just to tow it into the air, a setup as dangerous as it was impractical. The solution? Someone decided to bolt 6 engines onto the airframe and simply force the laws of physics to cooperate. That gave birth to the Me 323, a six-engine military transport with an enormous frame and fabric-covered surfaces. Visually, it was a brute. The fuselage was boxy, tall, and awkward, with six engines hanging off thick, wide wings. It looked less like an airplane and more like an oversized shipping crate that sprouted propellers. As the narrator noted, at a glance it looked like it shouldn't even fly. Powered by French Gnome Rhone radials making roughly 1,000 horsepower each, the Me 323 still cruised at only about 135 miles per hour, making it easy prey for Allied fighters. Yet despite its looks, it was a dependable workhorse. Nearly 200 units were built, hauling troops, vehicles, and even tanks. But with that bulky body and six exposed engines, it resembled a lumbering monster more than a machine of flight. Heinkel He 162 Volksjäger. From giant brute to pocket rocket, we come to the Heinkel He 162 Volksjäger, a late-war people's fighter that looked fast, fragile, and unmistakably odd. It emerged from Germany's emergency fighter program, a last-ditch effort to counter Allied bombers using cheap materials, mostly wood, and airframes so simple that if one was damaged, builders were practically expected to throw it away and start over. From the side, the airplane almost worked. The small fuselage, short wings, and gun-packed nose gave it a sharp, aggressive look, like a little hornet ready to strike. But then your eyes drift upward to the big jet engine nacelle perched on its spine, and the whole silhouette collapses. Instead of a sleek jet, it resembles a regular fighter with a barrel strapped awkwardly to its back. There was logic behind the choice. A top-mounted engine was easier to maintain and far less likely to suck in rocks or debris from rough wartime runways. On paper, the He 162 was supposed to be easy to fly, simple enough for glider cadets after only a few hours training. In service, it was anything but. Prototype accidents killed test pilots. The tiny fuel load forced rushed, hazardous landings. Fires were often fatal, and the airframe had a disturbing tendency to shake itself apart in flight. Entering combat in January 1945, it arrived far too late to matter. The core airframe had promise, but that humped-back engine left the He 162 looking strange, unbalanced, and memorable for all the wrong reasons. Arado Ar 232 Millipede. If the He 162 looked like a hornet, the Arado Ar 232 looked like a bug of a very different breed. Designed to replace the aging Junkers Ju-52, it was meant to be a thoroughly modern cargo transport. A boxy fuselage slung under a high wing, a rear loading ramp, and a tall tail positioned high enough for trucks and troops to walk straight in without bending or squeezing. What really made it stand out, though, was the landing gear. Instead of a few big tires, the Ar 232 rolled around on an entire carpet of small wheels, a complex multi-wheel system that earned it the nickname Millipede. Those little wheels spread the weight out and let the airplane crawl over rough, uneven ground where other transports would get stuck. The original plan called for two powerful BMW engines, but wartime shortages forced Arado to use four weaker Herth engines instead. That compromise stretched the airframe and left it looking even more ungainly and overbuilt. Despite the awkward looks, the Ar 232 outperformed the Ju-52 by a wide margin. Only around 20 were built, but almost everyone who flew it came away impressed. Two examples fell into British hands, and test pilots, including Eric Winkle Brown, were enthusiastic enough to use them for post-war transport runs. Still, with that box-shaped body riding on what looked like 100 tiny wheels, the Ar 232 resembled a walking freight box more than an airplane. Ugly, yes, but unforgettable. Blohm Voss BV 138. Flying Clog. From crawling over mud to skimming over waves, we land on the Blohm Voss BV 138, a flying boat built for maritime patrol service with Germany during World War II. It was designed to range far out over the North Sea, the Baltic, and even the Arctic, hunting ships and submarines. Under the skin, it was unusual in all the right ways. The BV-138 used diesel engines, something you almost never see on airplanes. They were less powerful but far more fuel efficient, and they could burn the same fuel as German warships and U-boats. That meant the aircraft could be refueled at sea, dramatically extending its patrol range. Originally, the plan called for 2 powerful BMW diesels, but shortages forced a switch to weaker engines, and that meant adding a 3rd engine on the center wing. That extra power plant did the job and absolutely ruined the lines. Visually, the BV-138 earned its nickname, the Flying Clog. The hull was broad and swollen, the overall shape like some sort of weaponized wooden shoe. With just 2 engines, it might have looked almost sleek. With 3, it became stubby, lopsided, and awkward. Even so, nearly 300 were built, and the BV-138 proved to be a highly effective patrol aircraft. Useful? Absolutely. Attractive? Not a chance. It still looks like a clog someone dared to throw into the sky. Junkers Ju-87, Stuka. You can't really talk about ugly German airplanes without running straight into the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka. As a dive bomber, it became one of the defining symbols of the Luftwaffe in the early years of World War II and a key tool of blitzkrieg. Those steep dives, paired with the wailing Jericho trumpet sirens on its landing gear, were designed to terrify troops on the ground, and they did. For a while, the Stuka practically was the sound of German air power. But as the original narrator dryly put it, it wasn't very pretty, was it? The canopy jutted out sharply from the fuselage, almost like an extra box glued on the side. The tail surfaces were square-cut and blocky, with none of the graceful curves seen on other fighters. The wings themselves didn't exactly scream elegance, and the fixed landing gear with big spats made the airplane look clumsy and outdated, even when it was new. In later G models, a pair of 37mm cannons bolted under the wings made it appear even more heavy and brutish. Militarily, though, it was a perfect example of function over form. Ugly or not, the Stuka served from 1936 right up to the last days of the war, and its outline remains one of the most recognizable silhouettes in aviation history. The critique is always wrapped in respect. It wasn't a looker, but it did its job. Bachem Ba 349, Natter. If the Stuka was ugly but effective, the Bachem Ba 349 Natter was ugly and downright insane. It was a true late-war desperation project, one of those last-minute wonder weapons dreamed up when Germany was running out of options and time. The Natter was a rocket-powered interceptor designed to take off vertically, shoot straight up into the bomber stream, and blast away with a salvo of air-to-air rockets packed into its nose. In practical terms, it was little more than a manned rocket tube made of wood. Metal was scarce. Designed so that even poorly trained pilots could, in theory, fly it. There was no landing gear. After the attack, the pilot was supposed to glide down to about 10,000 feet, jettison the nose, open the canopy, pull a handle to pop 2 parachutes while still inside, let the deceleration throw him out of the seat, and then deploy his own parachute. As the narrator deadpans, "Yeah, that really does sound safe, doesn't it?" The only manned test flight on March 1, 1945, ended in tragedy. Lothar Sieber, just 22 years old, launched successfully, but one booster rocket failed to separate. The Natter lost control and slammed into the ground at over 500 miles per hour, killing him instantly. Visually, it was as ugly as it was dangerous. A crude wooden tube with fins and a rocket motor, looking more like an experimental weapon than a real airplane. Junkers Ju-287. Topping our list is the Junkers Ju-287, a late-war experiment in building a jet-powered tactical bomber, and one of the strangest-looking machines ever to leave the ground. The original narrator joked that it looks like an aircraft made from random parts lying around the shop, and that's not far from the truth. Its fuselage came from a Heinkel He 177, the tail from a Junkers 188, and the landing gear from a captured B-24 Liberator. Onto that, the designers bolted a brand new forward-swept wing, then hung 4 Junkers turbojets, 2 under the wings and 2 stuck on the sides of the forward fuselage. There was real thought underneath the madness. The forward-swept wing improved low-speed handling and allowed a larger bomb bay because of where the main spar could sit. But that layout meant they couldn't carve bays into the wings for retractable gear, so the B-24 undercarriage stayed exposed. The wing structure was only stiff enough to carry 2 engines, so the other 2 had to be mounted on the nose section. For something that looked like a 2 a.m. kit bash, the Ju-287 actually flew reasonably well. But by the time serious work resumed in March 1945, resources had been pulled into the emergency fighter program, and the war was almost over. The prototypes were destroyed before the Allies could capture them. Technically, it was fascinating. Visually, with its borrowed fuselage, mismatched tail, exposed bomber gear, forward-swept wings, and jets scattered around the nose, it was one of the ugliest, most bizarre aircraft ever to take to the sky. And there you have it, 10 German aircraft that proved beauty was never a requirement for getting airborne. Some of these machines were brilliant, some were desperate, and a few were downright terrifying. But each one tells a story about the pressures, ambitions, and wild ideas that shaped aviation in its most turbulent era. If you grew up in the golden age of flight, or just love digging into the strange corners of aviation history, I'd love to hear which of these odd birds surprised you the most. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button if you enjoyed the ride, and don't forget to subscribe. We've got plenty more forgotten machines, misfits, and skyborne curiosities waiting in the wings. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.